Hi fellow painters, I'm Charles White. Welcome to my very first podcast, one of many pods I'll be casting in the next few weeks. For all of those who want to learn how to paint, I have no idea if you are a beginner or if you're a seasoned professional, but we're going to talk about the basics of painting today. I paint in oils, and I've put out all of the materials that I think we'll be needing in the coming pods. It makes me think I'm in the movie The Body Snatchers, you know, all these pods. So don't fall asleep. Maybe your body will be replaced by a pod. Anyway, let's talk about some of the basic things that we need to start with in materials. And we'll talk about the pallet, which I have right here, which is, for me, a disposable pallet. So I can tear it off, toss it. I don't have to scrape it and clean it every time. It's much easier to do this on a treated paper pallet and just throw it away. And I have a gray palette so that it doesn't reflect the light if you're painting outside. So I would recommend getting one of these. You can use glass or plastic or wood, but then you have to scrape it and clean it, and why do that? So that's the palette. It also has a cover over it, so we can seal off the paint. It'll stay moist, and it'll protect anything, you know, falling on your canvas or your palette and getting paint all over the place. It keeps it contained right there. And speaking of paint, let's talk about the paints that I use. I like to keep it fairly simple. So I start with titanium white, and I'd recommend you get this in a large tube because you use more white than any other color by far. So you buy this in a big tube. I put mine on the side here, and so we can leave this large space here for mixing. And then starting with the colors, I primarily hone in on the primary colors, which are yellow, red, and blue. And I've got 3 of each of the primary colors. So I'm doing a cadmium yellow light, a cadmium yellow medium, a yellow ochre, and I've already got my fingers stuck in the paint, so there we go. That's why we wear an apron. This is a cadmium red light, and a alizarin crimson, and an Indian red, which is sort of a red oxide rust color. And then in the blues, we start with cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, and Prussian blue. And we can mix all of the secondaries with these primaries. The only secondary color that I buy and use occasionally is viridian green, because although you can mix it, it's a little stronger coming out of the tube, and it's great for marine scenes if you're doing seascapes, or if you're doing skies. Sometimes I use viridian in skies. And also I have a tube of Payne's Gray on hand in case you want to get a quick gray. You can also mix your grays by doing all 3 primary colors together. That gives you gray. Or you can mix opposites on the color wheel to get gray. Red, green, orange, blue, yellow, purple. That'll give you gray as well. So you don't really need a gray, but it's nice to have something you can go to immediately and without doing a lot of mixing and get it. So those are the paints. I would recommend that you buy good quality paints. I'm using Gamblin, which is a good product, and also Lucas, which is a German-made product you can get from Jerry's Artorama, jerrysartorama.com. Good paint, very good consistency, and not expensive. And when we're talking paint, not expensive is good. So those are the colors in the oil that I use. The mediums that I use are linseed oil. It's a natural product. The linseed that I use has a dryer in it so that it dries fairly quickly overnight. I put it in a little container Put the container right there. Everything's nice and concise and together. As far as the cleaners, I use terps, odorless terps in a sealed container to clean the brushes. So that's pretty much it on paints and mediums. Let's talk about brushes. I'm starting with the rounds. I usually use a small round for small things, like small little branches on trees, little fence posts, small tiny details you have to do in a painting. I also use a larger round, and you can use this for larger lines or for shading like you would with a pencil. Very versatile brush. Then there's the flats or brights, which is a square brush which gives you a flat pattern to spread large amounts of paint over. It's a very, very useful brush. But for me, the brush that I use probably more than any is the Filbert, which is a rounded brush with a sharp edge. And I have several sizes here and several different kinds of material. This is a bristle brush, which is a little stiffer. And this is a synthetic brush, which the paint flows off a little bit better, and it has a little more flexibility, but it's not as durable as the bristles. The bristles you can scrub with and push the paint around and work hard, and they'll still keep their shape. The synthetics won't weather that kind of treatment quite as well, but they're good for detail work. And then last of all is the fan brush. And we use this to blend things together. If we have two colors that we want to blend, we will use a brush like this, which will give you a nice smooth blend. You can also use it to paint grasses in a format like this, or you can stipple it. And we'll talk about how to do that a little later. When you're purchasing brushes, don't get the inexpensive assortments. They're usually fairly cheaply made. The bristles start coming out of the ferrule, and it's you might as well spend your money and get a good brush. This is where you want to spend your money. Don't go cheap on brushes. Brushes are very important. They're the tool you're using, and you don't want to have a cheap one that either has no flexibility, is too stiff, or the ferrule doesn't hold the what are these things called? The little bristles. They'll come falling out, get in your paint, and drive you crazy. So spend the money on the brushes and get a good quality brush. As far as what to use, I buy rosemary brushes, which are handmade in England. Rosemarycompany.com sells these. They're not expensive, but they're very well made. I also buy Princeton, many other brands, but just make sure they're a good quality, not the cheap assortments that you get a lot of times in the craft stores. So this is a palette knife, and it comes in a variety of sizes, from small, medium to large. And we use this to mix paints with, to scrape paints off the canvas when we want to scrape something we've put on and we don't want, or to dig paint out if you have something that you need to take off the canvas. You use this as well. But it's primarily used for mixing, or you can use it also as an implement to paint with. A lot of artists use palette knives just to paint. It does consume, when you're using a palette knife, consumes a lot of paint, probably 3 times what you'd use with a brush, but it gives you a lot of texture, and some people really like the effect of the palette knife painting. So we've covered basically the materials. We didn't talk about the canvas yet. Canvases you can get stretched, like this one, which comes on stretcher bars, and his canvas stretched over tightly on the stretcher bars, which is what I would recommend. You can also get panels like this one, which is either done on cardboard, or the good ones are done on wood or a masonite material which will not warp. Those tend to be a little less expensive, good for beginners, and good on the field. When I'm going on trips to Europe, I always take panels. This is one of the panels I used in my latest trip to Italy. It's a linen panel, which is made by Raymar. Very good quality linen product, and it stacks very well. You can put it in your suitcase. It doesn't take the bulky, bulkiness of the stretch canvas. So they're easy to pack, easy to travel, and if you're in the field and you're painting outside, panels are lighter and easier to pack. So that's what I recommend if you're doing plein air painting, is to use the panels. Okay, time to catch my breath and talk about prepping the canvas. I personally don't like painting on a white canvas. So what I do is I will prepare that by doing a wash in acrylics. And I use acrylics because they dry fast. So we'll put the morning paper out here to protect this beautiful table. And use water-based acrylics, which will dry very quickly, to tone the canvas, and I will use red oxide acrylic. Put it right on there. And titanium white in about a 3-to-1 ratio. 3 times white to 1 red. Let's use this beat up old fan brush here to spread that around. Dip the brush in water, pour a little water on the canvas. And you're back in kindergarten, making little mud pies and spreading the paint around, just having a good time. We do this for a couple of reasons. Don't want to paint on white because it's very cooling. Everything you paint over a white surface will have a cooling effect. This will have the opposite effect. It'll warm things up, acts as sort of a backlight to the paint that you apply over it. So on every canvas, I will treat it like this with basically this color. You can go lighter or darker, it doesn't really matter, but as long as it's a nice warm pink. And I use the pink because it seems to go with every other color. It reacts well with greens, it reacts well with blues, with reds. I've tried more of a yellow ochre background, which didn't react well with blues. So consequently, over the years, I've sort of settled on this color. And let's take a towel, wipe some of that off so it'll dry a little faster. Don't need a lot of color or a lot of paint on there, just enough to sort of stain the canvas. So if we wipe most of it off, it dries in about 5 to 10 minutes and you're ready to go. Now if you're painting on oil primed canvas, then you can't use acrylic, of course. You'll have to use oil. And in that case, instead of using water, you would use turpentine and do a wash with the turpentine so it's very liquid and spread it on there just the same way. It'll take a little longer to dry depending on if you're outside or how much turpentine you use. But it should dry fairly quickly, I'd say within about a half an hour. But this is a gesso primed canvas, so you can use acrylic. And I try to do this before I start painting. I have a tendency to underpaint all of my canvases as soon as I purchase them, so when I store them, they're all ready to go. You know, if I want to use a bigger canvas, you know, I'll pull this out. I've got a 20 by 30 here that's all ready to go, so I don't have to spend the time prepping it before I paint. You know how it is. You get inspired. You want to go right at it. So you don't have to wait for all the prep time. So let's put this off to the side. Make sure you clean that acrylic brush, because if you don't, it will dry quickly and you will have a stiff, useless brush. Okay, let's talk about some of the effects of the brushes and what you use them for. I mentioned that they have different purposes for each brush. Usually when I'm starting out, I will use a fairly large brush like this one, which is a fairly soft, fluffy Filbert. Gives me quite a bit of room to paint. And we'll use a large canvas so that you can see things a little better. Let's trade places with, put this over here, put this over here. Can you still see me? Okay. Let's start with the rounds, and then we'll do the flats and then the filberts. So the rounds, the small rounds, you're going to use for, like I said, small lines. You want to do detail work. You want to do, say, fence posts, you know, going down a hill. Or you want to use tree branches. You've got a tree here going like this, and you want to use the small, tiny branches. You would use the small round. The large round, you want to do a tree trunk. Like so. And then finish it off with the small round, so that when it comes out here, the branches are quite tiny. You can also use the large round to do shading. If you're going to, say, cover an area like this, you use the side of the brush to shade, just like you would a pencil. Two main uses for that. Okay, the flats, you're going to use this. I've got a small one and a large one here. You can get them very big. You can get them, you know, almost house brush, house painting size if you want. But like I've got one here that I use for spreading large amounts of paint around. But this size is a good workable size. And say you're doing a sky, you want to spread as much paint around as you can. So you're using a little cerulean blue mixed with white. You're putting in the sky here, and you want to do large spaces. So you want to cover it quickly with a fairly large flat. Okay, that's primarily the purpose for the flats or the brights. A flat is, the only difference between a flat and a bright is a flat is a little bit longer and the brights are a little bit shorter. So they're also called flats, but normally a bright is shorter than a flat. Little tidbits of information squeezed into my tiny brain over 60 years of doing this. Now this is the Filbert, and this is the one that is used most often for detail work. I use it a lot for leaves, especially if I'm doing fall colors, say, and I want to put leaves on the tree. This brush gives you a nice arc, and as you put it on and you turn it and twist it, it gives you a leaf pattern that imitates a deciduous tree like a maple or any other kind of deciduous tree like a poplar or a aspen or elm, something like that. So these are you can also use these as in place of the round for a little larger lines. You know, you're getting very small back here. You want to get a little larger on your fence posts. So you might use this just like you would a pencil. It comes to a very sharp point, and you can draw very well with this. Now, that's a nice tight one. If you want to get it nice and loose, then you use that for clouds, say. You want to go in on your sky and put clouds in. This is a good brush for that because it's soft, it's fluffy. You can blend the two colors together nicely with a large. We'll do a cloud study in another podcast, but right now I just wanted to show you the uses of these brushes. Now, a fan brush you can use to blend colors together. You want to take out any hard lines, you just fan them together, and one color runs into another. Say you want to get rid of these, you want to just fan them in there, soften them, just hit them with the fan brush and it just dissipates the paint. Another use for fan brushes is for grass. So I'm rolling along here and I want to get some grass on this slope here with the tree. I'll mix some yellow ochre. See, I'm from California, so the grass here is golden, right? It's the golden state. So we have dry golden grass, especially this year in our drought. It's all golden. Where people in the east have green grass once the snow melts. So anyway, you apply this like this, which gives you a nice sort of grassy feel automatically. I don't know if the camera can pick this up or not. Let's try a little darker color. Let's go with the green. Add a little bit of yellow and blue together. And yeah, you can see this a little better. See, it automatically gives you a random spread of grass. And you can go this way or that way and make it random like it should be and not all uniform. You know, you can't go with a tiny brush like this and make every little blade of grass. You can, but it'll drive you nuts, and it'll be too static and too uniform. So the fan brush makes it very random, like so. And then if you want, you can, in California where you have very long dry grass, you can stipple, which means you hit the very edge of the brush like this, and you get little grassy seedlings. Let's put it down in here. I don't know if you can see that or not. Let's put it right up against this dark surface here. So you get that real random grassy effect with the fan brush. So, great for grasses, great for blending. And there are many different kinds of fan brushes. This is a synthetic. You can get them in bristle, which is a little stiffer, and you can get them thick, or you can get them thin. I like them very thin because it gives me that random grassy look. If it's too thick, it tends to just give you a crescent, and you don't get them separated like grass is. So I prefer them very thin. So buy good brushes, buy professional quality paint. Don't buy the student brand paint. There's no tinting strength to it. So buy good products and have fun with your painting. Paint what subjects you would like. We'll talk about that in a future podcast. And if there's any other subject you would like me to talk about, let me know.